The Atlantic has unearthed some evidence indicating that Donald Trump Jr. was in direct contact with WikiLeaks during the last presidential election. Now, there are different elements that make this story relevant, especially pertaining to some of the investigations that are ongoing in regard to Russia and potential Russian meddling in this past election. Before we get into the details of the direct messages that they shared with one another, there is some reason to believe that some of the leaked information obtained by WikiLeaks was given to them by the Russian government. Now, that is based on analysis by US intelligence agencies and organizations, but there are skeptics when it comes to that portion of the story. But with that said, I want to give you guys what their communication was and what kind of actions they took, meaning members of the Trump campaign, after they were given certain links and certain information from WikiLeaks.
So before you get started, let me just clarify that I'm among the skeptics. And including in this the importance of this story, all over TV, all over the media. Anna's going to give you the details. Let's give you the facts first, and then discuss whether it is groundbreaking collusion or not.
So first, how do we have knowledge of this correspondence? Well, WikiLeaks made a series of increasingly bold requests, including asking for Trump's tax returns, urging the Trump campaign on election day to reject the results of the election as rigged, and requesting that the president-elect tell Australia to appoint Julian Assange ambassador to the United States. The messages were turned over to Congress as part of the body's various ongoing investigations into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. They were turned over to Congress by Donald Trump Jr. and his lawyer, and they are cooperating with the investigation, so credit where credit is due, but that is where this information is from, and The Atlantic obtained this information and reported on it late yesterday. So here's where it all began. The first message sent to Donald Trump Jr. was September 20th of 2016. And in that message, someone from WikiLeaks, we don't know exactly who it was, essentially let Donald Trump Jr. know about an anti-Trump website. And somehow they managed to get the password to that website and told Donald Trump Jr., you should look into who is behind this website. Donald Trump Jr. actually responded to that and said, I'll ask around. And he did ask around. And so he notified a number of people affiliated with the Trump campaign, including the son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a number of campaign officials, and through that, they forwarded the information to one another. Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, Brad Parscale, and also Jared Kushner, as I mentioned earlier.
I think among these revelations, there is one relevant one. This one is among, in my opinion, completely irrelevant ones. So there's a website, we told you about it and you looked into it. Whoop-de-doo. That you could have found out about the website in 1,000 different ways. The New York Times could have called him and said there's a website, and he could say, I look into it.
Okay, so since Cenk prefaced any and all commentary he's about to give with what his overall take is, I'll give you my overall take. I disagree with Cenk in regard to this not being a big deal. That portion of what we know, I think, is not that big of a deal. But as we get deeper into the communication that they had, I think it becomes more and more significant and relevant. Not necessarily in regard to potential Russian meddling, but for me, it's more important to do an analysis of whether or not WikiLeaks has a political motive. And I think these communications make it clear that there was a political motive to help the Trump campaign. So let me go on. In July of 2016, on the first day of the Democratic National Convention, WikiLeaks released emails stolen from the Democratic National Committee servers that spring. The email showed DNC officials denigrating Bernie Sanders, renewing tensions on the eve of Clinton's acceptance of the nomination. So that's fine, that was included in the report. Less than an hour after the Washington Post released the Access Hollywood tape in which Trump bragged about sexually assaulting women, WikiLeaks released emails that hackers had found from the personal email, or stolen from the personal email account of Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta. So they're setting the stage to show that already it seemed as though there was a political motive, and then when you look at the private messages that Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks had with one another, it further reinforces that notion. On October 3rd of 2016, go ahead, Jake.
Sorry, I want to be clear. I think that WikiLeaks was on Trump's side, and I think the fact that they published some of the emails right after the Access Hollywood tapes is decent evidence of that, and there's a lot of evidence of it, including one damning part that we're going to get to in a second.
Yeah.
So I'm not disputing that. On the other hand, who's talking about the stolen Hollywood Access tapes? And where did the Washington Post get them? And who wanted to interfere with our elections and gave those stolen tapes to the Washington Post?
I don't think there was ever a question that a foreign government obtained those tapes and then leaked them in an effort to meddle in the election.
But look at the framing,
there's
Anna.
a difference.
Look at the framing
there.
Yeah, look at the framing though. The emails are always referred to as stolen. The Pentagon Papers are not referred to as stolen, but you can make an argument. The Hollywood Access tapes are not referred to as stolen ever by the media. But where'd they get them from? And who got them? Did they have permission from whoever the owner of Hollywood Access is, whichever giant company? No, they took them without permission. There's another word for that, stolen. So it's just a matter of how you want to frame it. If you give it to the Washington Post, well, that's awesome because they're a media organization. You give it to WikiLeaks, we don't like them. They're mean. They're the bad guys.
Yeah. So there is obviously mainstream media bias against WikiLeaks. I think that's well known. But I want you guys to just focus on what WikiLeaks is transparent about when they are messaging Donald Trump Jr. because they're very clear about what their intentions are. So regardless of media bias doesn't play a role in these direct communications. So keep that in mind. So on October 3rd of 2016, WikiLeaks wrote again, hiya. It'd be great if you guys could comment on or push this story, WikiLeaks suggested, attaching a quote from then Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton about wanting to just drone WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Donald Trump Jr. did respond to that, and he said already did that earlier today. It's amazing what she can get away with.
Now, look, I can't stand the Trumps. I worked super hard to make sure they didn't win. I am very clear with my perspective. There is nothing wrong with what Donald Trump Jr. said there. In fact, it is absolutely outrageous that the rest of the press gave Hillary Clinton a pass for wanting to murder what could be considered, I think somewhat correctly and accurately so by Anna, as she pointed out earlier, a political opponent. So even if you grant WikiLeaks is an opponent of hers, she wanted to murder a political opponent. If Trump had said it, the world would have exploded, and you know it. She said it. I don't know, was she joking? It didn't sound like she was joking. She wasn't joking. And even if Trump was joking when he said that, it would have been news 24/7. And it should be, because Trump is abhorrent and you shouldn't say things like that. What I'm annoyed by is whenever the establishment, Republicans or Democrats do it, they get a total pass.
Yeah. Look, here's my issue with all of this, right? The connection to Russia is not clear enough for me, meaning that, okay, our intelligence organizations say that Russia stole these emails or hacked into these emails. I'm not personally convinced by that because they haven't really shared that evidence with us yet. Just saying that they believe it and they believe it to be true is not good enough for me. But that being said, for me, what this story communicated was WikiLeaks is not some journalistic organization, which by the way, I was supportive of WikiLeaks even after all of this Hillary Clinton stuff came out, because my view of them was they obtain damning, evidence that speaks truth to power, and they leak it. And they're, to say that there are never any political motivations or biases is naive, right? But I did not have proof of how deep the bias was during this past election. And I think that's relevant for people who are looking at an organization as like WikiLeaks, thinking, hey, this is a credible organization that has no political bias. Clearly they did, and there's a lot of evidence here to prove it, which unfortunately we haven't even gotten to yet. So let me get to that.
Hold on, but I gotta wait. I agree and disagree in parts. So the part I agree with you, and I'll go even further, is that even Mike Pompeo, Trump's CIA director, not Obama's, Trump's CIA director says that he thinks there is a connection between WikiLeaks and Russia. So now you take that for whatever it's worth. So it's a data point, and I do take that seriously. At the same time, almost everybody that works in the US government, both establishment Republicans and Democrats, hate WikiLeaks with a passion. So I'll take it with a big grain of salt. Now on the issue of whether they're credible journalists, that's where I disagree with you. Yes, I think this story does prove that they were clearly on Trump's side. That doesn't mean that they can't be credible. It doesn't mean that the stuff that they leaked isn't true. It was true.
But there's also
and they are still a media organization.
There is also the question of what they refuse to leak or what they refuse to talk about, like the oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs that were implicated in the Panama Papers, and how WikiLeaks, refused to do any type of work on that issue. So I think that this communication, their very clear support of the Trump campaign, coupled with the fact that there were certain things that they refused to leak, draws a picture that concerns me about their credibility. So I'm just putting that out there.
Okay, I understand. Right. And if you want to take it with a grain of salt, that's fine. And in fact, I'll go further and say, look, they hurt their credibility more when they're not honest about their perspective. Because that's, to me, Fox News, that's fine. They're conservatives, we don't like them, and I think they're wrong on each issue, and we debate them. The problem isn't that. The problem is they call themselves fair and balanced, and they're not fair and balanced. That's a joke, and everybody knows it. So I would hope that WikiLeaks wouldn't continue to make the same mistake. Whatever your perspective is, you should be open and honest about it. We're very honest about our perspective, and I don't think, given this story, among others, I agree with Ana that they have not been open about what their perspective is.
So let's give you a little bit more of their communication. So at one point, WikiLeaks sent to Donald Trump Jr., strongly suggest your dad tweets this link if he mentions us. WikiLeaks went on, pointing Trump Jr. to the link WLSearch.tk, which it said would help Trump's followers dig through the trove of stolen documents and find stories. There's many great stories the press are missing, and we're sure some of your followers or follows will find it. By the way, just released Podesta emails part 4, just 15 minutes after that message was sent. Wall Street Journal's Byron Tao pointed out that Donald Trump himself tweeted very little pickup by the dishonest media of incredible information provided by WikiLeaks, so dishonest rig system.
So in that case, does it show that the Trump campaign is communicating with WikiLeaks? Yes, of course. He didn't randomly do it 15 minutes later. He did it because of that communication with WikiLeaks. But the stuff was public anyway, and have journalists sent out their articles to the people that they wrote about in hopes that they would be shared on social media? Almost every time, every day. So if any other journalist said, hey, here's the article I wrote about you or about someone else and sent it to you, it would be the biggest no big deal of all time. When it happens with WikiLeaks, oh my God, they wanted their link publicized. Of course they wanted their link publicized, so does everyone.
Right, so look, I agree with you on the surface, right? So if it is proven that they did not obtain their information from Russia and there wasn't Russian meddling, then you're absolutely right. WikiLeaks should not be treated any differently than any other media organization. But the concern here is that a foreign government is meddling in our election process. And if that is proven, I think that these types of communications are relevant.
I want to be really clear about this. And I know that it's a tough distinction, but I think it's an important one. If Russia says, hey, I stole these emails, Trump, would you like them? I think that's a giant problem. And I've talked about that in the past many times on the show. That is a real issue, and it has legal ramifications, and it should be thoroughly investigated, and I'm thrilled that they're investigating them, okay? But Russia or anyone else gets access to information, passes on to someone in the media.
Russia didn't get access to information. They stole and they hacked.
Whatever, Daniel Ellsberg stole the Pentagon Papers, and people will find that outrageous, but he got them without permission and gave them to the New York Times. Almost every single leak is without permission given to a member of the media. And we never complain about that. You'd have to arrest 3/4 of Washington if those were all stolen.
You're talking about American whistleblowers or American leakers. We're talking about the influence of a foreign government possibly having an impact on our election. So that's what makes it different, right?
So if Canada somehow got some information and it was super relevant to the American people, should the New York Times print it? My answer is absolutely. And so if you don't agree and you say, no, Canada, Russia, no, New York Times should suppress the information because it came from a foreign government, either one that's friendly to us like Canada or one that's not friendly to us like Russia. Okay, those are all fine points of disagreement. I say they should publish it because the American people have a right to know. I think there was incredibly valuable information in those emails, and I don't think the Russians should have stolen it. I don't think the Trump people should have worked with the Russians. Those are legal issues, okay? But when you give it to a media organization, yes, the media organization has every right to print them.
All right, so let's move on to, by the way, 2 days after they shared that link with Donald Trump Jr., he also tweeted it out. Again, the link that was provided to him by WikiLeaks. Now, moving forward, let's go to graphic 23. On Election Day, November 8th, 2016, this is when things get interesting. WikiLeaks wrote to Donald Trump Jr., "Hi Don, if your father loses, we think it is much more interesting if he does not concede and spends time challenging the media and other types of rigging that occurred, as he has implied that he might do." So that is, honestly, it riled me up more than I expected it to, because that is going to lead to complete chaos and turmoil in the United States, and you're now pushing for that, right? And you are now undermining and questioning the election process. And by the way, rigging is an interesting word used in this context. The DNC was dirty as hell. There is no denial of that whatsoever, especially on this camp. What they did to undermine Bernie during the primaries was clear, and I do think it's important that the American public was aware of that. So I was fine with those leaks 100%. However, there is no evidence to indicate that votes were changed or that voting machines were hacked into or that votes were tampered with in any way, shape, or form. To me, that is rigging. Manipulating and rigging are two completely different things, and just this constant narrative that was coming out during the election about rigging. There was no rigging. There's no proof of rigging. Manipulation by the DNC in order to undermine Bernie Sanders, absolutely, there was evidence of that. But rigging, I mean,
look, let's not get sidetracked here, because now you're going to get me on a warpath on that. Everybody has a different definition of rigging, and so people just keep assuming that the other person has the other definition of rigging. Some people mean rigging means the DNC picked one side and helped that side. That definitely happened, definitely. The DNC chair admitted it. Some other people legitimately think rigging, that word, means actually changing votes. There's not nearly enough evidence. People will say, oh, I got the snapshot on, no, nobody's ever proven that, okay? So I don't want to get sidetracked on that, and that drives me crazy when people make declarative statements about what the word rigging means. Anyway, on this issue, that particular communication with Donald Trump Jr., it is damning. WikiLeaks, by saying you should not concede the election if you lose, and you should challenge it. Number one, it clearly shows that they have a perspective, and it might be fine to have a perspective, but they were pro-Trump. Now it is absolutely clear. And by the way, you could say, hey, if the Democrats want to imprison you or do God knows what else to you, and in the case of Hillary Clinton, maybe murder you, you might be pro-Trump too. Okay, but they were pro-Trump. That's fine, but they were pro-Trump. That communication clearly proves it. Okay, and by the way, like I said, it's okay to have a perspective. So they were pro-Trump, but they should be honest about it. And they're not, okay? The second reason why that's damning is, wait, why do you care if the election is already over that he not concede? That sounds like you want an absolute mess. And you don't care if he actually won the election or not. You didn't say if you think you won the election, you shouldn't concede. You said you shouldn't concede no matter what, which then to me says, oh, God damn it, did you work with the Russians? I mean, is it not just that you got access to emails either through the Russians or somewhere else? It's that you actually worked with them because the Russians want to cause a mess here. That is now absolutely proven. They had the troll farms. Not only did they do all these different things in the election, but outside of the election, years before the election, they would set up Facebook accounts that were seemingly liberal and seemingly conservative. They would try to get us to fight. They were trying to rip us apart. What is a good way to rip us apart? Don't concede the election and say, no matter what happened, I'm going to fight anyway. why is WikiLeaks saying that? If you all you care about, hey, you got a perspective and you think Donald Trump is wonderful and you want him to win, that's one thing. You want to rip the country apart for what reason? Well, I know the Russians want to rip us apart because that's already on the record in all the different ways that have been proven that they've been trying to do that. So to me, that particular message is actually really damning for WikiLeaks, and it's an absolute shame because they publish really valuable information, and I wish they would just do that. And again, I don't even mind if they went an extra step and had a perspective, but to not be honest about it and then to potentially work with the Russians to try to split us apart, God damn it, why'd you do that? And so it's just, and by the way, that is not conclusive, but it is an important piece of evidence, and denying that it's important is ridiculous. It is important.
I also want to just quickly note that they kept urging Trump to give his tax returns to WikiLeaks so they could essentially, I'm paraphrasing what they said, but control the messaging around his tax returns, because WikiLeaks was under the assumption that it would eventually get leaked anyway, and it would be better if WikiLeaks handled it as opposed to an media organization like MSNBC or the New York Times.
So 90% of that I have no problem with. They're saying, give us your tax returns and we'll publish them. Every single media organization would have done likewise. Maybe they were even tricking Trump. You could argue, and they now, Julian Assange is arguing after the fact that no, I was trying to coerce him into or trick him into giving me the tax returns and I'd publish them. And do other journalists do that? Yes. The only slight issue there is, so they said, so that we can improve the perception of our impartiality, and that we wouldn't be perceived, as another quote, perceived as coming from a pro-Trump or pro-Russia source. Well, if behind the scenes you're saying, look, I'm on your side, but I need to appear not to be on your side, well, that is by definition not being an honest actor. So that's a shame.
Yes, and then finally, there's a lot of other stuff, but let's shorten this a little bit. One of the final messages that was sent to Donald Trump Jr. By the way, at some point he just stopped responding to them. And at this point he had stopped responding. Hi Don, hope you've been doing well. In relation to Mr. Assange, Obama, Clinton placed pressure on Sweden, the UK, and Australia, his home country, to illicitly go after Mr. Assange. It would be real easy and helpful for your dad to suggest that Australia appoint Assange ambassador to Washington, DC. So this was, look, my read of it was an attempt to kind of let Assange off on some of the sexual assault or rape allegations that were lodged against him. And so maybe this was a way to get out of it. I don't know, but it was interesting because it seemed as though they wanted something in return for what they were doing.
All right. So Assange wants to get the hell out of the prison that he's been put into by the Western governments. I don't blame him for that. Is this a wacky scheme to do that? Yes, it's particularly wacky. And he knows that, and they say even in the messages that it's not gonna work, but it's about framing. So, okay, well, all right, you work with the Trump campaign for your own purposes, and I get it, but I wish you'd have been way more transparent about that. The whole point of WikiLeaks is transparency. And I do have a significant problem with that they were not transparent about their motives and who they supported in this campaign. Now, having said that, as I've been saying throughout this piece, 8 out of 10 of these allegations that everybody else in the press is treating as bombshells, the rest of the press does on a daily basis. Help us build independent media. Become a member of the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.